The Diary of Elizabeth H. Platt. The account of her journey from New York to Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1836 with her mother, Sarah Esther Henshaw, including a visit among the Winnebago Indian tribes. The Diary of Elizabeth Henshaw Platt is read by Kathy Gittleson.
Chapter 1. New York City to Clinton, Ohio, via Troy, Albany, Schenectady, and Utica. Mother and myself left New York August 1st, 1836, and commenced our long-anticipated pilgrimage to the far west. Mr. and Mrs. Chu were to be our compagnons du voyage as far as Troy. The day was hot and the boat crowded, and nothing occurred to interrupt the monotony and tedium of the oft-wended way, but a short interval of kind and agreeable conversation from one of the wonders of the country, Miss Catherine Sedgwick. She spoke of the pleasure she frequently received from looking in a little book which bears my name as its owner, lent to me by Theodore Watson, an interesting nephew of hers who now slumbers in the dust. The mention of this little circumstance awakened a long train of sweet but painful associations, youthful days, fond hopes, fervent affections, the early loved, the early lost, a wreath of myrtle and cypress, memories of love and death. We remained in Troy 10 days, long enough to witness the nuptials of my friend Mademoiselle du Corval and Colonel Oswald, a Mississippi planter. We left them in Troy in the full tide of matrimonial hope and joy, and on August 12th, with Mary Dodd, we took stage for Albany, having engaged Mr. Fuez to go with us and see us safely in the railroad car for Utica. He introduced us to Professor Davies of West Point, a most gentlemanly and pleasant man, who attended to our baggage with all due discretion and politeness, and saved us all unladylike and troublesome supervision of the same. Our fuming and fiery Pegasus took us in full speed to Schenectady for 62 cents apiece. Here we alighted to a good dinner, mother averred, but I, having a mal à la tête, declined such an ethereal ailment, and substituted a siesta in its place, for which I was obliged to pay 2 shillings, thus being reminded that my face was turned towards that country where they ask $50 for the privilege of sleeping against a signpost. We left Schenectady at 3, and in the same kind of flying velocipede traveled on to Utica. Our mode of traveling bade defiance to any critical or satisfactory survey of scenery, but we could not pass unobserved the singularly wild and romantic country as we approached the vicinity of Little Falls. Above us towered tremendous acclivities whose steep sides were covered with verdure to the very summits, while far, far below the beautiful Mohawk passed on an unobtrusive silence, emerging now and then as if to let us know that she still kept her humble position at our feet. At Little Falls the cars paused a few moments, but my aching head prohibited anything more than a glance at the massy rocks which enclose the river on each side and form a wall to which its wildest moments can never pass, at the aqueduct bridge and the white foam of the rapid current. We reached Utica at about 8 o'clock, and here it seemed as if all Bedlam was let loose, in the turmoil and confusion and the obstreperousness of porters and hackmen and passengers all turned in together among heaps of baggage. Through the manly aid of Professor Davies, we secured ours, and then taking each an arm, made the best of our way under his auspices to Bagg's Hotel. Here the professor left us in solitude, although I think it might be called a populous one, to pursue his way by canal to Syracuse, while mother and I, as soon as we could obtain an attendant among the crowds of visitors, was toted over the street to another house, where we took up our lodgings for the night, and glad was I to lay my weary, aching head upon a soft and welcome bed. The next morning, which was Friday, we took our breakfast at Bagg's, after which Mary Dodd called us with her aunt to see us, and in company with them we walked through the principal streets of Utica. It is a very pretty city of about 10,000 inhabitants and contains some very handsome private dwellings. Mother was quite enraptured with its beauties, but to a child of the mountains, as I am, whose eyes have been accustomed to dwell upon their imposing and varied scenery, and whose brightest associations and most affecting recollections are cradled, like sunbeams and clouds, amid their valleys, this country, though rich and luxuriant, is not captivating. We called with Mrs. Hart at her own house, one of the prettiest places in all Utica. She very politely invited us to remain until the stage was ready to take us to Clinton, but we declined, and after eating some of her gooseberries and culling some of her sweet and beautiful flowers, we returned to our inn. Here we dined most sumptuously upon beef, chickens, ice cream, oranges, etc., and then with 11 inside passengers took stage for Clinton. We arrived there in 2 hours, squeezed to death almost by children and baskets. The stage would not take us up the hill, about a mile to President Davies, so we engaged the landlord at the stagehouse to furnish us with a conveyance. And now behold us in a little bit of buggy, such weighty concerns as mother and I, with baskets 1, 2, 3, myself acting as phaeton because the vehicle would not admit of a driver. Mother, between her admission of the beautiful view from the hill and her fears of breaking down or being run away with by means of her unsophisticated driver, found her mind constantly occupied. We arrived safely at the mansion of the president, which is delightfully situated about a half a mile from the colleges. Our names were announced, and Mother sate in trembling expectation, full of the fears which have haunted her modest spirit ever since we commenced our journey, that such an old lady would not be otherwise than an intrusive guest. Mrs. Davis's quick ear, having caught the name, flew into the room, spite of her dishabille, clapped her hands around one, then around the other, returning to Mother, the oldest and dearest, explaining, "You dear woman, you dear woman," again and again embracing her, reiterating each time with augmented warmth, "You dear woman, how glad I am to see you." The apprehensive old lady was by this time reassured, and glad she had been prevailed upon to come to Clinton. Miss Polly Davis soon entered and welcomed us very cordially, and towards evening we were taken into a bedroom and introduced to Mrs. Treadwell, the mother of Mrs. Davis. The sun threw his setting beams across the form of the venerable and solitary woman. She was 91 years old and looked the being of another century. Her speech was unintelligible by reason of paralysis, but yet a murmuring sound was continuously proceeding from her lips, and she seemed to be dreaming of other days. When I told her that I was the widow of James Platt, she grasped both my hands almost convulsively, as if she had found a link connecting her with life. She articulated James Platt fully and distinctly, and then with a melancholy groan, as if returning to her habitual thought, she murmured, "Dead, dead, all dead. Is he? Is he?" She clung to me as if unwilling to let go, as if my name brought back the tide of memory and enjoyment and was the last remnant of her buried happiness. This feeling seemed to be renewed as often as she saw me, and the same withered hand pressed mine, and the same melancholy voice sounded in my ears. "Dead, dead. Is he? Is he?" It was painfully distressing to witness humanity thus in ruins. God's fairest, noblest work, the human mind, having lost its polar star, the light of reason, and like a vessel tossing about without chart or compass. We spent 5 days in Clinton very pleasantly. Almost daily did I take my walk down and up the hill and past the neat white cottages. They are magnificently situated, commanding a view 20 miles in circumference of a most rich and luxuriant country, with the village of Clinton and the distant spires of Utica. On Saturday evening we were called upon by Mrs. Knowles, a most talkative and amusing little lady. She took me for a young girl and said if I would get rid of dyspepsia, I might not exercise in the open air and employ myself in domestic duties, but that I must keep at it, drudge, 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 the whole time, without stop or stay, and then I should get well, as she had, with a large family of boarders and no servant. Mother thought the trial would be as effectual as that of the man who attempted to instruct his beast to go without eating. By the time he was effectually taught, he died.
End of chapter 1.